So you've decided to look at a K13 Micra. What are the key areas you should look out for? Well, there aren't that many things that are majorly wrong with this car. One thing you should know with the K13 Micra is it's basically a Renault Nissan parts bin special. It's on the same platform as a Clio 3 and Clio 4. It's using parts that are common to many other Nissan models, as well as using an engine that was then used in many other Renault Nissan engine cars. In terms of the mechanicals, the HR12 and 1.2 and the HR15 and the 1.5 are very good, very reliable little engines. So in terms of intrinsic reliability, they're actually quite good, especially for considering some of the more modern Nissan engines haven't been that brilliant. One of the complaints you do have with this car is, if you're in a market with a CVT, is the CVT transmission, but thankfully in Australia we don't have that. One of your other complaints with this car is the manual gearbox can be prone to having some whining and some graunching and not liking selecting gears. That means you're in the market for a new transmission. The automatic's pretty reliable, the 4-speed Jatco box is actually quite a good one. And they only tend to have issues if they're A, very poorly maintained, or B, have a lot of mileage on them. But that gets to a point with this car, maintenance. Because it's a cheap car, because many of these were sold to rental car companies originally, and then bought by people, from people who were on bad finance, they don't tend to be that well maintained. There's your problem. These engines aren't maintained, and that's when they have their problems. They can last it, they can last the course, even if they're not maintained, but maintenance is critical with this car. On this specific car, the oil that was drained out a couple of days ago was quite black. It wasn't very nice, smelt quite a bit. It wasn't in the best of shape in terms of that, and that's because it's all changed. Last oil change was 2 years ago. Your main issues with the Micra are in the trim and body department. So the top glove box lid is always prone to breaking. The two attachments seem to be made of particularly poor quality plastic. The trim in here is also known for cracking at times, so if you're a very badly maintained car, a very sunstroked car, you will see some cracking along some of the plastics. The carpets, they like to tear. On the driver's side, they're torn a little bit. Again, very cheap materials here. We're talking about a car that is made very cheaply. One thing you need to consider is the upholstery. Now, these seats, if they're badly treated, they're likely to rip and tear. So it's a good indication of looking at the car's seats to gauge the condition of the car. Other thing you should consider is the speakers and the door trims. They're prone to having some issues here and there. Again, it's not the end of the world, but it can happen on these cars. Like I said, it's a very cheaply made car, and some of these shortcomings are shown as the car gets older. One of the biggest problems on the K13 though are the wheel bearings. They seem to be quite cheap, the original Nissan wheel bearings put in the cars, and they tend to break. Oddly, it's the right front and the left rear that tend to be the biggest problem. On this car, it was the left rear wheel bearing that was a problem, and that had to be put right. And to put it right, you can get two rear wheel bearings for around $108 a set, which I found online, and you can get them pressed for another $80. And it's a DIY job, it's very simple to do, or you can get a shop to do it for another $100 extra in labour. Now, the next thing you could also do is the front wheel bearings as well as the rears. And again, similar sort of money, $100 to $150 for a pair of wheel bearings. And again, similar money for a shop to press them in, $80, and to get the labour done if you want to do it all in a shop. But again, these aren't expensive to deal with, and once you deal with them, they shouldn't be a problem for a long time. One of the common K13 issues to look out for is the lower control arms on the front suspension. They tend to have a habit of going at about 100 to 130,000 kilometres. It's not a difficult fix, it's a DIY job, and the parts don't cost a lot. Bank on about $100 to $150 per control arm, or you can get a good deal on the set for about $190, or you can get them fitted at a shop for around about $350 to $600. Not an expensive fix, but something that needs to be put right. Something you need to consider with the K13 Micra is the bodywork. Now, one thing you need to really think about here is lack of peel. Now, some cars from a warmer climate, for example, this one that came from Queensland, does have a little bit of peel on the mirrors, but it isn't that bad. Other cars I've seen from warmer climates, such as places in Queensland and South Australia, tend to have a fair bit of peel all around the roof and the doors. So something you need to consider with these cars from warmer climates, that they may have some peel. The paint isn't the best and is easily chipped and can be very easy to remove if it's scratched, and also because of hot conditions, it's easy to fade. From the driver's seat, the Micra feels very cheap. Everything is cheap, plastics, scratchy. It's not the most welcoming cockpit in the world, we shall say. But One plus side is these pedals on this specific car fit my large feet. Size 14s do fit in this one. Not in all of them, but at least in this specific example. So, the Micra's driving dynamics, what are they like? First and foremost, that gear shift. Feels like you're stirring a bowl of porridge. It feels notchy. The gear stick itself isn't so bad, but going up or down, it just feels notchy in every way. And the engine, there we go, is bereft of power. You have to rev the living lights off it. You've got to get the thing to 3.5 or 4,000 RPM before you can get any degree of power. However, the one thing you notice behind the wheel is while the steering is not so bad and the engine sort of pulls alright, very noisy, it's very coarse in here. Although, that puts it to me in a very interesting way. You see, in my eyes, this car is a modern day take on the Datsun Stanza, because it has a tiny little engine that'll run on rat poison and acid until the end of time and above, and it's built remarkably cheaply in here, and it's got componentry that's prone to wearing out because it's cheap. It's a cheap little reliable commuter. Everything the old Datsun did, this one does. So it does at least have that going for it. Unlike many modern Nissans, this one's actually quite reliable because it doesn't have the dreaded Jatco CVT in it. And yes, although the trim is an issue and there might be a few issues here and there, crucially, they're not that expensive to rectify. Parts of this car cost very little. Rear wheel bearings, I was able to get them for $50 a piece. Same with the front ones. Bushers, $10. Engine oil and filters are cheap. Componentry, spark plugs, $20. Coils, they're not that expensive either. You can get one for about $50 a piece. The car is quite simply very cheap to buy and very cheap to run. And if anything does go wrong, also there's plenty of wrecked ones out there for you to go look for parts for. This CD system, $48 from a wrecked car. That top glove box though is the only expensive thing I've really got on the car. Probably the most expensive thing on the car, apart from the tyres. So, even if it does have its issues, the Micra, crucially, it's not going to send you broke trying to fix them either. In Australia, our Micras came from 3 different plants. So if the car you're looking at has the first 3 digits of the VIN as MNT, it's from Nissan Motor Company Thailand, or Siam Nissan as it was once called. Now, MNT cars tend to be built between 2010 and 2013. These are Thai-built cars in the Thailand factory, and they tend to be relatively decent quality. The one I've got here has the first 3 digits of MHB and was built by PT Motor Nissan Indonesia. And also the VIN font is different on the build plate compared to the other cars. They have a traditional Nissan build plate font, whereas the Nissan Micra cars have what looks like an engraved font. These tend to be cars built between 2010 and 2013, although the majority of them tend to be built in early 2012. And the final one is MDH, which is Renault Nissan India, where the car was sold as the Renault Pulse in India. And these cars tend to be built between 2013 and 2016, and they again have the same sort of build font as the Thai cars, and also as a build plate is Nissan Motor Company Ltd Japan. So the Thai cars actually say they're from Thailand, the other 2 actually have a Japan build plate. The only way you're going to know they're from outside of Japan is the first 3 digits of the VIN number. So the next digits in the VIN are FBU K13A. This is the model designation of the K13A Micra. And then the remaining digits are the serial number. So in Australia, we have a serial number based VIN. If you're looking at a car in the US and Canada, it follows a standard US VIN, but this is only for Australian cars. Even so, the first 3 digits of the VIN will tell you where the car is from. The next ones are the model designation and then the serial number. One thing to consider with the K13 Micra is that because the car's built in 3 different factories, the parts are different from car to car in some areas. Please check with Nissan or with your mechanic to see which part fits for your car. is something I came across with this car, that the lower control arms were the same for 3 of the 4 types of Micras, but because the later facelifted cars had slightly different arms, it was different for them, although my car had the normal arms you'd see on an early car. So you need to check this before you buy the car, or when you're servicing the car, to make sure you know which. Price-wise for a K13, you're looking at $3,500 to start, and this is normally a rough car, ST, 2010, manual, may or may not have a lot of registration left on it. Go up to about $5,000 for an early car. Look for a car with relatively reasonable mileage and decent history, and a decent number of registration months on it. Or look for a car that's relatively younger but with a lot more Ks, because some of those younger high K cars tend to be bought and very well serviced. So if you find a K13 with 200,000 Ks at around the $5,000 mark, and it's a 12 or a 13 car or 14, it may not be a bad buy compared to an early one, especially if it's been well maintained. The car you're looking at here is around $6,500. We've put 12 months worth of registration on the car, and also that car has 116,000 Ks. Now, around $6,500, $7,500, you're looking at 12s, 13s, possibly somewhat high mileage 14s, so maybe around 150,000 Ks. And they make decent sense as well, because these cars are relatively young, they're relatively in good condition, and if they're looked after, can do very well. Automatics, you're paying a $2,000 to $3,000 premium depending on where you are. So the cheapest automatics would fall around the $5,000 mark, but you need $6,500, $7,000 to get an early car with an auto box. And this is for an ST. The TIs command a bit more as well, so it's maybe $1,000 or even $1,500 above what an ST is. So there were 3 trim levels: the ST with a base 1.2 litre HR12 engine, then the STL with the HR15 in similar spec to the ST, and then the TI with with the electric windows of options on the STL and the ST, with the HR15 engine on it and alloy wheels. $10,000 would secure you a 15-16 ST Manual with very low Ks on it, although to get a car with around 80,000-90,000 Ks in this climate, you're looking at around $8,000, and that actually also makes a lot of sense. A relatively young car for the money. The cars that I don't think make much sense in the K13 Micra are the very expensive TI models, the later cars, 14, 15 and 16 cars. I've seen them advertised as high as $14,000, almost what they were worth new, considering the demand on small cars. And I would say maybe if you look at something else at the end of the market. It's a good car, but at that end, you got much better cars than the Micra. It is dynamically a lot worse than some of the others with an auto box, and because it's only got 4 speeds, and also the fact that it's a lot heavier on the front end. So I would say if you're buying a K13 Micra, best go under $10,000, look for a manual. Any of the engines will do. Both are HR series engines, and the HR12 with a 3-cylinder and the HR15 with a 4-cylinder. Both make sense. Both are very economical. Both are very reliable. It's worth looking at it under $10,000 as a manual. As an automatic, I'd be considering again under 10, but just remember, you are paying a significant premium in places like South Australia and Queensland. That premium can be as much as $3,000 to even $4,000 for some of the later cars over the manual, which to me doesn't make that much sense. It's actually cheaper for you to get the lessons to learn manual than to buy the automatic, but that's just me.